We start this hour in Europe's east, and Ukraine, Russia and the United States have entered the second day of US-brokered peace talks in Abu Dhabi. US envoy has confirmed that Russia and Ukraine have agreed for a prisoner swap of war in their meeting in Abu Dhabi. Ukrainian negotiator Ruston Urumov confirmed the continuation of the talks, which remain focused on aligning positions through trilateral consultations and group work. While Kiev described the first day of discussions as substantive and productive, no major breakthroughs have been made and differences between the parties persist. Russia's envoy Dmitriev called the talks positive, noting progress towards a potential peace deal despite pressure from the EU and UK to push for faster resolutions. Let's take a listen in.
Ну, как вы знаете, совместно с администрацией президента Трампа идет активная работа по восстановлению отношений Россия-США по экономическому направлению, вот в том числе в рамках российско-американской группы по экономическому сотрудничеству. И мы в том числе встречались сегодня, и встречи идут позитивно.
Сергей Александрович, а есть ли прогресс по мирному соглашению?
Вы знаете, здесь неким индикатором может быть то, что вот разжигатели войны из Европы, из Британии постоянно пытаются помешать этому процессу, постоянно пытаются в него влезть. И вот чем больше таких попыток происходит, тем больше мы видим, что, безусловно, прогресс есть и идет хорошее позитивное движение вперед.
Но здесь в Абу-Даби помешать невозможно, я полагаю.
Ну, им сложно, но они...
Meanwhile, back in Ukraine, a Russian drone attack on Kiev has left 2 people injured and caused damage to residential buildings and an office structure. As per reports, Ukrainian air defences shot down most of the drones, but some debris still caused significant damage. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, a Russian affairs expert. He joins us live from Brussels. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Of course, talks have entered their second day with positive words from both sides, both the Russians and the Ukrainians. Do you have any hopes for today, Gilbert?
Well, if there are hopes, they won't be announced to us. The Russians, the Americans are doing everything possible, and the Ukrainians are participating in this secrecy, which is essential to its success. So I have no criticism of the way they're proceeding, but they do leave us in the dark. And what is being released by Mr. Kirill, the spokesman for the Russian side that you have put on air, is to divert us from the reality of the substance of the conversations. Mr. Dmitriev is telling us that they're about improving relations, trade relations. Oh, well, of course, there must have been some talks on the sidelines of that. And after all, that is the area of his own personal expertise, representing Russia for the sake of improving commercial ties. But that's not what they're spending 2 days in Abu Dhabi discussing, nor are they spending 2 days in Abu Dhabi discussing the prisoner exchange. That is a line of communication between the Ukrainians and the Russians that has been going on separately under the aegis of Mr. Medinsky, who was formerly the head of Russia's negotiating team. What they're talking about is the Ukrainian capitulation, and they do not want to call that out until all the terms have been agreed. That there is a capitulation under discussion. The Ukraine is going to give up the territories that the Russians demanded in Donbass is 100% certain. When today's New York Times features an article saying that recent polls show that the Ukrainian population is now 40% disposed towards giving up Donbass, it's probably an underestimate. The Ukrainians don't know about the $700 billion in financing that will come to Ukraine if they agree to this deal. If they learn about that, then it won't be 40%, it will be 90% in favor of giving up to the Russian demands. So a lot is going on, but we're not hearing about it.
Yeah, indeed. And security guarantees, you've spoken about territory, of course, is the most pressing point. How likely are we do you think we're going to see information on them anytime soon? We now know that the document is finished and Donald Trump is yet to sign it, but we don't know much about it. What more can you tell us on that?
Well, the American involvement in security guarantees will probably be significant, but not in the sense that most media expect. The United States is not going to put boots on the ground. It will not allow Europeans to put boots on the ground because the Russians are firmly against that and will resist any such attempt. There will be a more sophisticated type of security guarantee, mostly of a financial nature. That is to say, if the Russians should violate the terms of the peace, then they will lose advantages that are now being given to them, or will be given to them, once they sign the peace treaty. By that I mean the lifting of sanctions and other benefits that are substantial to Russia if the peace goes through. But it will not be boots on the ground. We'll hear about this when a complete agreement is reached with all aspects, because it all fits together. And just to talk about the security guarantee separately at this point does not make much sense.
Something that hasn't been talked about much is the minerals deal that was signed in April of last year. Of course, that grants the United States access to some of Ukraine's mineral-rich east. How is that going to play into these negotiations, and is that leverage that Ukraine holds?
I don't believe that there's any leverage there, and I don't believe it had any substance from the very beginning. It was being used by Donald Trump to show that he was going to claw back some of the $350 billion in assistance that he says the Biden administration gave to Ukraine, a totally inflated figure, of course, but that he would claw something back for the benefit of American taxpayers. The notion, there was talk about the United States getting a share in the energy mix in Ukraine, taking a share in the power generation at the largest nuclear plant in Ukraine that is now held by the Russians. All of these were nice talking points to keep the press distracted from the reality. Ukraine has nothing in mineral rights to interest the United States, finally. What they had is largely in Russian hands, and there it never amounted to much. The Russians had very good geologists, they had very good mining experts who never developed these resources because they weren't commercially viable. And that hasn't changed. So I don't believe that that component that originally was talked about so much by Trump has any relevance today.
And there's statements coming from Zelensky today that he estimates about 55,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died in the war. This is, of course, widely disputed. We don't know how many soldiers have died on either side confirmed as of yet. But of course, some figures put that up as above or up to 500,000 people, some even more. How credible are those numbers coming from Zelensky today?
Well, let's look at what the Russians are saying. It's more or less being admitted that at least 150,000 Russian soldiers have died in this conflict, and probably more like 200,000. The ratio of kill from Russians to Ukrainians is at least 7-1, maybe 10-1. So we just do the arithmetic. If 200,000 Russians have died, then at least 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers have died. That's the reasonable number.
Okay, and of course this comes after Putin and President Xi of China also had a phone call within the past day. Do you see China at all getting involved a bit more when it comes to this conflict and putting an end to it? Of course, as other leaders have put pressure on Beijing, or at least floated the idea of them putting pressure on Putin to close this war off.
Well, there's a lot of talk about putting pressure on China, particularly with respect to its oil imports from Russia. Everyone has talked a great deal about India and India cutting back on its imports of Russian oil, which is true. They're not buying from the two sanctioned Russian oil drillers and exporters, Rosneft and Lukoil. But of course, they're importing something. China, nonetheless, was a much bigger importer of Russian oil. And China buys it with real money, with real convertible money, yuan, whereas India was buying it with inconvertible money that's just been piling up in the ledger books among the financiers, but does the Russian army no good whatsoever. The Indian oil was coming by sea. The Russian oil to China is largely coming by pipelines and is invulnerable to sanctions. So in general, the notion that pressure can be put on China in the single biggest area in which it is, shall we say, aiding the Russian war effort by its purchase of oil, there is no leverage whatsoever.
Dr. Gilbert, Dr. O, do stay with us as we turn to our next story and we head to East Asia.